I never thought my life would fall apart like this. Or at least, not the way it did on that special wedding day. One has the unsaid conviction that you are in this together no matter what life throws at you. But that belief shattered into a million fragments when my wife, Clara, filed for divorce. To set the scene, it was 1 week after the funeral of my father-in-law, Robert, a legendary figure. Despite his stoicism, he was self-made, diligent, and surprisingly kind. He was the type of person who expressed himself more through deeds than words, and those deeds built a multi-million-dollar empire. I had known Clara had issues with him. She always complained about how I never expected this level of betrayal, but I let her live her life. With her arms folded and a smug grin, Clara stood in the living room, curling her lips as she stated, "I want a divorce." At first, I thought she was joking. I laughed. "Can you believe it?" "Come on, Clara," I said. "What are you talking about? We just buried your father. Shouldn't we be discussing our next steps together?" But one look at her face told me this wasn't a joke. It wasn't even a spur-of-the-moment decision. No, it was premeditated, meticulously, planned and executed. "You're of no service to me. I no longer need you. Useless," she muttered, her words slicing like a dagger. That word kept repeating in my head, hurting more than I cared to admit. Useless. I had stood by her side for years, encouraged her when she felt hopeless, believed in her when she doubted herself. And now I was worthless? Then I realized she had already inherited $379 million. She believed that money made her untouchable, invincible. It was her golden ticket out of this marriage. I tried to stay calm, staring at her, but I'll admit it wasn't easy. The betrayal and anger simmered beneath the surface. But I wasn't going to let her have the satisfaction of seeing me break. So I said, in a light-hearted, almost humorous tone, "If that's what you want, okay. I'll sign the paperwork. But Clara, keep this in mind. Don't regret it later." Yes, I did say LOL, and judging by her expression, she thought I would beg. Instead of crying or trying to stop her, I gave her exactly what she wanted. I signed. Without hesitation, I handed her the documents and walked out of the house. I didn't even bother packing my belongings. Clara had made it clear where I stood in her world, and I'll be honest, it was hard to leave that house. It wasn't just a structure. It was the place where I had poured all my love, hopes, and dreams for our future. I had believed we would grow old together. But clearly I was the only one who had ever thought that way. So I walked away and chuckled. Not out of amusement, but because I knew something Clara didn't. She thought she held all the cards, but she had no idea the deck wasn't real. As I walked down the street, I thought of Robert. He had always been one step ahead of everyone, and I knew without a doubt that he would never have handed over $379 million to someone as reckless and entitled as Clara without safeguards in place. I didn't have all the details yet, but I knew enough. While Clara celebrated her so-called victory, I let myself trust that Robert had foreseen this exact situation. She thought she was free of me, free of responsibility, ready to step into a life of luxury. But when reality hit like a freight train, I wouldn't be there to catch her. No, this time Clara was on her own. Assumed she had struck gold after quickly reading the first page, Grayson laughed heartily. "The trust fund is locked unless she complies with the requirements specified by your father. After 5 years of keeping up with my father-in-law's full-time job, financial management courses, and both, I released a low whistle. For Clara, 5 years will feel like 50 years. According to Grayson, Robert thought that having money without discipline was a surefire way to fail, and he wanted her to know the value of diligence and accountability before having access to such a substantial sum of money. Robert was a genius who understood his daughter better than anybody else and devised a scheme that would either make her mature or make sure his money was donated to a worthy cause. But Grayson wasn't done. There's still one more thing, he continued. Robert left you a share of the estate. Additionally, 20%. I nearly dropped the phone. 20%? Are you serious? Sincerely, Robert appreciated your regard and consideration for him, particularly in his latter years, and he wanted to make sure you were acknowledged for it. And while I was thankful on the one hand, I wasn't sure what to say on the other. I couldn't help but feel guilty because this wasn't my money. This was Robert's legacy. But he had already spoken his desires, and I wasn't going to debate with the wisdom of a deceased man. As I thought about this, my mind turned to Clara, who must have been losing her mind. The trust fund's circumstances were not only annoying but disastrous for her. Clara had always shunned responsibility, but now, to gain access, she would have to perform the one task she hated, work. And that wasn't all. The fact that 20% of the fortune had been given to her worthless ex-husband was the harshest insult. Robert could have sent from beyond the grave. It was his way of saying, "Grow up, Clara. Learn from someone who recognizes the importance of hard work." I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. For years, Clara had been griping about Robert, calling him severe, accusing him of being stingy and domineering. But ultimately, his discipline and intelligence ensured that his wealth wouldn't be wasted. Now, here's the thing. In addition to teaching Clara a valuable lesson, the trust fund demonstrated Robert's moral fiber, his faith in responsibility, and his determination not to let his wealth destroy the people he loved. I hung up the phone with a bizarre combination of vindication and closure. Clara had always viewed Robert as a barrier standing between her and the life she believed she deserved. But now she was confronted with the terrible truth. He was the only person who genuinely recognized her potential and was prepared to push her toward growth. I wasn't going to gloat, but maybe, just maybe, I would enjoy thinking about her spending. 5 years trying to figure out how to keep a job. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free of Clara's conceit. Free from her incessant criticism. Free to go on with my life and the $40,000 I'd ultimately receive from Robert's will. It was more than just financial compensation. It was a reminder that integrity, hard work, and respect matter. And I kinda wished I could have been a fly on the wall when Clara realized the reality. Like a freight train. Clara, who had always shunned accountability and thrived on entitlement, was now facing a reality she couldn't control. I could picture her sitting across from Mr. Grayson, her hands shaking, her face going pale, and everything falling apart around her. When things didn't go her way, she would raise her voice in that panicked tone. "What do you mean I have to work? That's ridiculous. I'm his daughter. I'm entitled to the money." Grayson, professional and composed, probably replied, "Mrs. Emerson, your father was very clear about his intentions. He wanted to make sure his money was used wisely. These requirements are unavoidable. For someone like Clara, who had avoided hard labor all her life, this must have felt like a terrible joke. She had created a mental image of herself where she faced no repercussions for giving in to every whim. But suddenly, that fantasy was disintegrating. And when Grayson disclosed that I had received 20% of the estate, I could almost hear Clara's fury. The thought that her father deemed her worthless ex-husband deserving of his regard must have been intolerable for her. "Why does he get 20%? She must have asked Grayson. "He's not even part of this family anymore." Grayson probably reminded her of the one thing she refused to acknowledge. Clara herself had never shown Robert the respect that I had in his final years. And the best part? She couldn't stop it. Robert's will was ironclad, meticulously written, to prevent any legal challenges. Clara had no choice but to accept the terms, no matter how unjust they seemed to her. But the true blow arrived later. After the meeting, after the arrogance was stripped away, after she left that office with nothing but the brutal reality of her situation. She was unemployed, divorced, and now confronted with the intimidating task of meeting the trust fund's requirements. She must have spent days pacing her house, trying to figure out how to fulfill them. She likely considered challenging the will, but deep down, she knew it was futile. Robert's attorney would have foreseen every argument. And Clara? She lacked both the resources and the willpower to fight a losing battle. Regret must have begun to creep in. For years, she had destroyed relationships, convinced that with $379 million, she would be untouchable. Now she had nothing. And the poetic justice? She was being forced to adopt the exact principles she had mocked her entire life. I imagine Clara sitting in that big house, staring at the trust fund documents, reflecting on our marriage, on everything that had gone wrong. Maybe, just maybe, she realized she had underestimated me, but she would never admit it. Too proud for that. The desperate text she sent me, however, was proof enough. I didn't respond. There was no point. For the first time in her life, Clara was being held accountable, and no one was coming to save her. While she struggled, I was moving forward, free from her privilege, free to rebuild. My life, however, I saw fit. Clara is probably still struggling to accept her new reality. Maybe she's looking for a job. Maybe she's just sitting in that house, wallowing in regret. Maybe she's enrolled in the financial management course Robert mandated, but one thing is certain. She will always remember the day her illusions came crashing down. And looking back, the strangest thing, I didn't feel anger. I wasn't resentful. Even after learning that Clara had destroyed her future, I was just relieved. Because the divorce? It wasn't just an end. It was a beginning. For the first time in years, I could focus on my life. No more entitlement, no more whining, no more walking on eggshells to avoid Clara's tantrums. And in the quiet, I often thought about Robert. The lessons he had imparted, both in words and actions. Integrity, discipline, respect. These became the foundation of my new life. And while Clara wrestled with the conditions of her trust fund, I was busy building something real. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.